Okay, so all right, mudita. Mudita is one of the four Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas mean divine abodes or heavenly abodes. The first is metta. We've covered metta. So again, these are heart practices. The second is compassion. I think we all know what compassion is, but we can get in. We'll be discussing that next week in greater depth. Then the third is mudita. Mudita means sympathetic joy or empathetic joy. And that helps you really get at it, but actually the definition is just joy. So this practice cultivates joy to make it really available. And actually the real point of it is to reseed the procedural memory banks with lots of joy so that that becomes a place from which you operate. Okay, so that's a little bit about mudita, but let's go further. Let's go into it deeper. Oh, I'm sorry. And then the fourth Brahma Vihara is equanimity. The way I think about the equanimity means like kind of equipoise of mind, like a kind of unconditional experience of peace. So, okay, the first three Brahma Viharas I think of as love. So loving kindness is just honestly love. But you know, you have to put the kindness in there. So it's like this kind of differentiated from another kind of love, but it's just love, it's generic love. Then compassion is what love does when it sees suffering. When it sees the brokenness of the world, compassion is how love manifests when it sees that. Then there's mudita. And the way I think about mudita is what love does when it sees the good, when it sees strength in others. So, okay, that's a little bit about mudita. So let's drill a little bit further down. Okay, that's all I can think of for what it is, but I'll look at my notes here in a moment. Okay, why would you want to practice mudita? I think it's somewhat clear, but let's drill into that further. And now I'm going to repeat what I said a moment ago. With mudita, which is both a visualization and also a felt sense, and there's an auditory component as well. What you're doing is you're kind of, in a sense, programming, almost like brainwashing yourself to have joy more available and more as your kind of default mode of operation. Like it said, we don't rise to the occasion, rather we fall to our level of practice. And so when we practice mudita, when we practice loving kindness, then that's where our baseline is. So then without thinking, you act from that place. You act from the place of loving kindness, of sympathetic joy, of compassion, etc. Okay, more to the point. Expressed delight or joy is actually one of the 5 main facets of secure attachment relationships. So in a sense, joy makes up 1/5 of the important qualities of the positive qualities of relationships. And so when this becomes more available, our relationships improve because of 2 reasons. One is we've reprogrammed ourselves so that our actual, that like the, there's a word here, hold up. Can't think of it. This kind of like the place from which we operate is more joyous. And then that elicits healthier relations with others. It brings about healthier relations with others. And what you end up doing is you start imagining better situations, better outcomes with others. And that imagining and then like kind of acting in concert with that positive imagination is how we co-create our world, but co-create it in a way that's actually positive. Whereas when you have lots of negative conditioning, especially early attachment conditioning, and attachment conditioning is in place by like 20 months of age. When you have good attachment conditioning, then you fabricate your reality in a very positive and adaptive way. Okay, more to this point, Jordan Peterson says that the mark of a good friend is someone who wants to see you succeed. So this meditation, we will be soaking ourselves in joyous thoughts about others and appreciation for their good qualities. And that is obviously very near to wanting someone to succeed. So we're learning, in a sense, to be a good friend. That's what Mudita teaches us. What are some other benefits of Mudita? So all of the Brahma Viharas, all of the heart practices, so metta, compassion, mudita, increase epistemic trust. Epistemic trust, so epistemology means like to know, and then trust is to trust. So it's like this quality of knowing that life is trustworthy and that it's good and that people kind of want what's best for us. Not in a Pollyanna way, but in a kind of mature, positive way. And you can think of this as the opposite of paranoia. So doing the Brahma Viharas, doing metta, doing mudita, ingraining this into our subconscious elicits and brings about epistemic trust. And epistemic trust, according to Peter Fonagy, who's a British psychologist, is based, like, nearly shared identity with good mental health. So let me reiterate that what we're doing here is building good mental health. And then once we have that basis, then the more transcendental type meditations and practices that kind of move us beyond just a kind of mundane experience, those really work a lot better once you have that solid basis of really having a happy, functioning life. Okay, good. So we'll be getting into how to do the practice in a moment, but let me look at my notes, make sure I'm not leaving anything out. Okay, so mudita is said to be the hardest Brahma Vihara. People struggle with this. Okay, that's something to watch out for. The next issue, this will alert you to mudita. If you ever have envy or jealousy, then you remember to drop that and do mudita, because mudita is the opposite of jealousy and envy. Moreover, there's something interesting about all of the Brahma Viharas. The Brahma Viharas, these heart practices, should be practiced in an unreasonable way. Like having joy towards your enemy, having loving kindness towards your enemy. Doesn't make any sense in a certain way. But that's very important because for two reasons. Number one, and now this is obviously a reasonable argument that I'm making here, but to develop this kind of unconditional joy towards others just gives us more joy. And also when those other people see that in us, it elicits joy and ease in them, and then they'll operate from that place to some extent. However, importantly, there's actually an insight. So, and I really mean this in like the insight meditation sense of the word. When you develop unconditional joy, unconditional mudita, unconditional metta, unconditional loving kindness, then it helps you see past subject-object duality. And it helps you to see emptiness, see the emptiness of thoughts, and no longer be enslaved by thoughts. But maybe we can talk more about that at a later date. So this is just a quote that I think is helpful. It's from the suttas, so the ancient scriptures of Buddhism. When one sees or hears that some person's qualities are esteemed by others, and that he is at peace and is joyful, one thinks, sadhu, sadhu, may he continue joyful for a long time. Okay, good. So what should you watch out for? What are the ways to kind of get into trouble here? Well, so first off, with mudita, we never abandon discriminating wisdom. Like just because we're joyous doesn't mean we quit thinking or quit making informed decisions or become a doormat. But I think I mentioned that in the earlier meta class. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. The other thing to remember is that, like with any practice, it's subtle. And at the beginning, it might not really work. And so you have to be patient with it. And that early part of the practice, when you're being patient with it, it's really not going well, you're not concentrating, you're not getting anywhere, that's an equanimity practice. You're working on your equanimity, which means this quality of being able to bear what is difficult. So that's one way to think about that. Okay, here in a minute, I'll launch into how to do it. Well, let me give you a little bit of a, what is it, a aforemention of what this will look like. So we'll do mudita exactly the same way that we do metta, right? We go through the easy to love person, the mentor, ourselves, an easy to love, a loved one, a neutral party, an enemy. Then we do the geographic version. So you wish mudita for yourself and all the beings in the room, all the beings in the building, and on out. And then the other way that I like to do mudita, is with the paramis. So the paramis are spiritual virtues. And quickly, like a few of them are like ethics, generosity, tolerance, equanimity, wisdom, things like that. And so, but I'll be guiding everyone on that. And then, like we've done with our other practices, you have a phrase going, a phrase like, to reflect on you fills me with joy. There we go. Yep. So to reflect on you fills me with joy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we'll do it. Okay. So then that's basically the lecture on mudita. Are there any questions on mudita? And we can discuss those now, and then I'll give a quick lecture on the paramis or the paramitas, which are these spiritual virtues, and then we'll get into the guided lecture. So are there any questions? Okay, Jessica, did you want to say something? You're muted.
This seems like a lot to understand. Like there's so much. Do you have like a printout, like anything that has these definitions? And because I jotted a bunch of notes down, but I'm going to look at them and be like, okay.
Yeah. And I can send something out after this, but then let me just reiterate some of the big points. Mudita is just joy, sympathetic joy. That's it. We already know what metta is. The Brahma Viharas are just these set of heart practices. Then I mentioned epistemic trust, which is this quality of trusting the world and that it's a good place and it wants what's good for you. And then I think and it also kind of shares identity with basically good mental health. And then the last thing that could be confusing are the paramis or the paramitas, which are these spiritual qualities that you try to cultivate. I think that those are all the kind of funny terms. Were there any other ones?
No, I think that's a good overview, but it's just, it's a new practice. So it's just learning and understanding, and, like when you say the paramitas or all the terms, like I've never really used those before. Sure. So, yeah.
Okay, good enough. Okay, any other questions coming up for people? Okay, let's assume not. So let me go over to the paramis themselves, and I'll talk on them. So, okay, the paramis. So I'm just going to go through a list of what the paramis are. The first is generosity. The second are ethics, morality. The third is renunciation, or letting go, non-attachment, simple living. The next is wisdom. The next is energy, effort, heroism. The next is Khanti, which is, well, I'm sorry, I'm giving you the Pali name, which is forbearance, patience. The next is Satya, which is truthfulness, trustworthiness. The next is Aditana, which is strong determination. And I'll send out a website where you can find all these in a list. So Aditana, strong determination. The next is Metta, loving kindness. The last is Upeka, which is equanimity, which is this kind of smiling impartiality. So let me just very quickly pull those up and I'll put them in the chat. There's not even a shred of mystery here. And then, so what I would say is, why don't you pull these open and look at them, look at the list while I read. Oh, hey, Lisette, good to see you. Glad you could join. Okay, cool. So, okay, the first is Dana. Dana has the same etymological background as donar, dar, donation. So it just means generosity, to give. The second, and then let me back off on that. So this coming week, I would recommend, do acts of generosity. Generally, I recommend that students do 6 acts of generosity a day. That's really reprograms the mind. Also, I'll say something else about generosity. Generosity is one of the most effective means for curtailing depression. And there's definitely research on this. Also, in a depressed state, there's a sense of lack. Well, when you give, you have this sense of, oh, I have abundance. Like you're giving, you're behaviorally manifesting in such a way that informs your psyche, your deep psyche. I have enough. Because your psyche understands that if you have enough to give, you must have enough. So generosity is a fantastic practice. Sila. Sila means ethics. That's the second parami. And I think about it like harmlessness. Excuse me, harmlessness, trustworthiness. In a sense, this is a gift you give to yourself and others. And also, it's the foundation upon which you really build epistemic trust. And again, epistemic trust is largely mental health. So by having good ethics, that's how you maintain mental health. And also good relations. If you have problematic ethics, you really can't maintain high quality relationships. Wait a second. Okay, good. The next one, nekama, which means letting go, non-attachment, renunciation, living simply. I think that in a sense, this is what's coming up for me right now. It has to do with like a lightness of living, right? Simplifying your needs and not being run by your desires or your aversion, but rather just living a simple life so that there's time for things that matter, like good relationships, meditation, spiritual practices, volunteer work, etc. The next is in Sanskrit, it's prajna, and in Pali, it's panya, which means wisdom. And the way that I'm going to define wisdom here, and some of this might seem a little bit strange, so don't get freaked out if it seems weird. So what is wisdom? Well, I'm going to define it here as no view, as emptiness, as not getting fixed in, not being caught into view. The allowing for experience to turn into flow and seeing that. The insight into non-fixity, no thingness, and the seeing how things are open and flowing and uncoagulated. That is wisdom. Okay, good. The next one is virya, effort, heroism, energy. And this is what, kind of like drives your spiritual practice. This is what energizes you to be there for others. And interestingly, as you meditate, your energy levels definitely increase. We spend a lot of our time fighting with afflictive mental states of negative mental states. And as we meditate and deepen, those aren't weighing us down, and there's a lot more space and freedom, and then there's a lot less constriction, there's more energy. The next one is khanti, forbearance, patience, tolerance. The thing that I like to quote about khanti is that khanti, there's a guy named Ajahn Sumedho, who's a Buddhist meditation master, and he says that khanti, tolerance, forbearance, is like a jackhammer through the defilements, through our negative qualities. So what happens is, especially in meditation, and I'm sure you've all seen this, like, your negative qualities will arise, hindrances arise. And then you know what? If you just sit there with it calmly, serenely, with tolerance, forbearance, they arise and then they fall. And then they start arising less because you don't react. And the reaction is what holds them in place. That's not the totality of the story, but the reaction definitely prevents further healing of our afflictive state. The next one, satya in Sanskrit, or satya in Pali. This means trustworthiness, truthfulness. This is another spiritual virtue. And I think that this reiterates, in a sense, the aspect of trustworthiness from sila, ethics, from earlier in the list. The next is aditana. So that means pushing through. It's strong determination, perseverance. This is what helps you push through even when things are difficult, which is an obviously useful spiritual faculty. The last two are metta and upekkha. Upekkha just means equanimity. And again, equanimity is very similar to khanti, forbearance, and very similar to nekama, letting go. It's just, being calm with how things are, being at ease with the way that things are. Okay, good. That is it for lecture. And we'll do the guidance here in a moment, but are there any questions coming up right now?
I was sort of wondering, like, what the relation is between the spiritual virtues and like the Eightfold Path and Buddhism.
Sure.
Like, they're not the exact same thing, I don't think, but I wasn't counting whether there were 8 of those or
yeah.
how many.
I can make a comment on that, but first I'm going to tell a joke. They say Christians love Jesus and Buddhists love lists. So the Buddhist is always one list after another with Buddhism. There's a lot of overlap and relation between the Eightfold Path and these 10 paramis. And then I'll also make just a general comment that it said that in any teaching of the Buddha, you grab any single teaching of the Buddha and pull on it, you'll get the whole rest of the Dharma. So all of it points to the same thing, kind of. Quickly I can go through the list of the Eightfold Path and then maybe make a comment or two. The first fold is right view. Right view and wisdom are the same thing in my mind. So right view is, again, which in Buddhism is actually no view, not getting stuck on views. In a sense, not believing your own thoughts. That's one way of putting it. The second piece is right intention. Sometimes translated as right thought. That just actually means like just to try to intend to cultivate what is wholesome. And you kind of see that echoed in the list of the paramis. The third is right action, right speech, and those have to do with ethics. And then the next is right livelihood, and then the next is right livelihood. Has to do with your work, so you don't want to do something that's harmful as a livelihood. and then I've also heard right livelihood being defined as what you do with your time. So you want to spend your life doing something that's wholesome. You don't want to be like an executioner or a soldier or something like that. And then the next few are right effort, which that was also on the same list, and then right mindfulness, which just means awareness, being aware of what's really happening, which that's what those are the skills that you're working on with see, hear, feel. And then the last is right samadhi, right concentration, which is not represented on that list over there. But anyway, okay. Any other questions coming up? Okay.